This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The fallout from cuts to city benefits, plus a look ahead at the fall elections, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a number of journalists to look at the top stories of the week. First, Jackson Baker from the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here. And Les Smith, Fox 13 News. Well, we start this week with the ongoing fallout, the ongoing reaction, and the ongoing moves with cuts to the city benefits. It started, Jackson, with really a plan to a dramatic cut to health benefits for retirees, then moving into potential cuts and changes in the pension plan. What's the fallout been since the last votes, and we move toward the main vote on the pension plan here in another week or two?
Well, it has put into action a squeeze we already knew was there. This city has been trapped in a dilemma caused by a low tax base to begin with, which is based on the fact there are not enough taxpayers of quality, of quantity, and a need to attract industry to change that fact. And because we've assigned so many pilots, that is a fact of life, and is defended relentlessly by every mayor we've had for a while, then the squeeze has to come in something like pensions and health care benefits, and that's what has happened. This was inevitable, it has happened, people are reacting to it, and there is no answer to it. There is no solution. We just have to sort of grit our teeth and get through to the next chapter.
The timing would have never been good at any time. I mean, you have this budget deficit, total of $1.3 billion, I think. In order to get us kind of square and back on target towards paying that, we've got to come up with some $551 million over the next couple of years to help get us back on track and pay for getting it up to date. The overall question here is the greater good. You've got city employees, families, 7, 10,000, maybe 12, 13,000 people, versus the taxpayers of Memphis, 600,000 plus folks. They did not raise the property tax, which would have been required. $23 million would have had to have been raised through property taxes if they had not passed this 24% increase in the premiums for retirees and others. That's a fact of life. Then the next year, as we were told, it would have been up to 46 cents for taxpayers. That may still be yet to come, but at least for this time around, taxpayers dodged a bullet. But in the meantime, somebody else has to suffer. And in this case, it was the city employees.
Well, and we've had people from all sides of the debate on the show over the last few weeks. And I think most recently when the union folks were on, they said, well, look, we understand that their point was there's some sacrifice need to be made, but right now it's all being done on our backs. That's their feeling, and they're very emotional. They're very upset about it, and they're moving towards legal action about it. But is that the sense? I mean, that you mentioned, the pilots and the business community pushing for these sort of cuts and saying, it's an unsustainable path we're on. Was this all done on the backs of the unions?
Pretty much so, I would say. And it has been one of the war cries of people who demand this kind of action, that people are voting with their taillights. They're moving out of Shelby County to go to more tax lenient counties nearby. Well, people in the police department are now voting with their resignations.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that was Tony Armstrong came out this week, the police director, or I guess it was last week, excuse me.
Yes.
With asking the administration, asking the city council to walk this back. He's since been somewhat quieted down by the administration. He is in a funny place where he's got these police officers, he's got his employees who are taking big hits, but he's also a member of the administration. What was your take on that?
Yeah, it was a deal, I think, with, Tony had brought in and talked with Michael Williams to tone it down. Michael Williams is the Memphis Police, president of the Memphis Police Association. But in exchange, I think Michael Williams also got Tony to come out a little bit and support the guys in blue. And that's what it was. And I think that he had to tell AC Wharton, what he was going to do.
Yeah.
And I don't think AC held it against him. He realizes, as he told me, he said, well, lawyers probably be in favor of lawyers and cops are in favor of cops. But at the same time, it just goes to show you that how difficult this whole situation is with the unions and where it puts different people. For instance, the 7 people who voted for, the 7 council people who voted for it as opposed to the 5 that didn't. They're getting all kinds of heck. I mean, they have since the night of that vote. Mayor A.C. Wharton, of course, has been cast as a villain in all of this. And you have Tony Armstrong, who is kind of caught in the middle of management here. So many people are affected politically here that with the 2015 city elections coming up, it's made it now very interesting for everybody who's going to be running, and especially for Mayor A.C. Wharton.
He is not used to being called a coward as he was during the showdown last Tuesday night of these votes.
And that goes back to his not showing up, right?
Yes,
he didn't come down into
staying in his
the
office,
chambers. He
watching things remotely.
didn't listen to the people as they spoke, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, he's
He was
always
not
had a
part
habit
of that.
during confrontations in the past of having some George Little or another delegate down there shielding things from her, but he usually will appear. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he maintained his remoteness here has caused a lot of reaction. He is what he appears to be in private as well as publicly. He's a very good-natured, gentle man, very smart man who is not used to a lot of contention. As a lawyer, he was persuasive, not demanding. He got results for his clients through his good nature. This is a past where he sees year after year after year after year of this coming in the future. There's begun to be speculation he won't be a candidate in 2015.
Well, and as we kind of segue into that, I mean, there's also the fact that people, what they, I guess, maybe like about him, but you also hear criticism, is Wharton likes consensus. He doesn't want to move forward on an issue, big or small, until there's consensus, that all the parties come together and they move forward as one. And sometimes that's just not possible.
That's
when you're
sometimes
taking
not possible.
people's benefits away, or when you're raising their taxes, or you're making those painful decisions, there's going to be people on one side who are really upset.
And especially when you know that those people who are upset on that one side are also joined by about 5 council members who are going to be on their side regardless.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article for the Flyer calling them the usual suspects, Joe Brown and Janice Fully Love and people like that who jump on that bandwagon of the union and the city employees. They don't want to fire them. They don't want to take their benefits away. They're ensconced in that position. So you know that's going to be there. But for Wharton, you know, he's got to do what he has to do. It's what the state comptroller had said, we've got to get our house in order. We don't have a choice.
And then they passed the law.
And then they passed the law.
There's a law that across this,
That's
it's
right.
not a Memphis bill only, it's other communities too.
This is
You've
not
got to fully
made
fund
up
it.
And it's a
stuff.
Shelby County representative, a senator who passed that law, too.
And it's
That's
also
right.
not, I mean, it's not just a Memphis thing by
That's
any
right.
stretch. You go from Detroit to the state of Illinois has issues that make us look like a pin drop, you know, in terms of their unfunded liabilities. It's a national problem that every community is trying to deal with in some way.
To give those 5 people their due, that you know, these incorrigibles were always going to vote. They're representing their constituency. Their constituency, I'm sure, is pleased with how they do it.
Yeah, I'm sure their constituency is, but is it realistic? And,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm saying.
Well, you mentioned the impact 2015. I mean, what is the impact on elections, do you think? I'll start with you.
Well, we had the case of Jim Strickland, who for years has been the Cassandra of the city council, saying these cuts must occur. We must stay within our means. And now he's, of course, with the majority on this, and he's more comfortable than most of the people that he shares that side with. He is still looking toward a possible mayoral race in 2015. He will have to form a brand new kind of coalition. He must make converts among those constituents that those 5 people are representing. They must be able to see that only through a little austerity now can we progress to a point where we can expand things out again.
Yeah.
But he's definitely, and Harold Collins, who's resisting all this, he sees his chance, a main chance in 2015. If AC does not run, and there are indications he's considering not running, despite what he said in the past, Harold Collins is a likely representative of all those people who feel this retrenchment has gone too far.
And let me say, you know, I had a conversation with Mayor Wharton after in the same week that all this was passed, and he seemed like a man who was just getting kind of fed up with this whole thing. I think there are projects like Bass Pro that he wants to stick around through and see through to its fruition and completion. But he told me the thing, he said, you know, there are people out there who want to find some way to push my button, and they can still go on and try, and they can still go on and do it. But this is not a man who is used to this kind of abuse, really. And I mean, he's been threatened in the past, whatever, county mayor, this, that, and other. But he's been painted, and it's almost a vitriolic hatred that people are developing for him. And he's not used to this kind of thing.
But don't you think beyond, I mean, we live real in this very narrow political sphere, you know, in our daily sort of work lives. Don't you think broadly he still has wide popularity and support beyond the people that maybe are knee deep in these issues of you know, the union cuts and so on? The general population still, I would bet, has quite a bit of support.
He can make the numbers work, but the wear and tear is what he's
No, I'm not taking away from that. Absolutely.
The numbers, the numbers, but remember this though, that he was elected the last time, you know, big margin of victory, whatever, but only 20% of the registered voters voted.
Right.
And it's always been the criticism, at least in the African American community, that AC is more interested in pleasing the white business-oriented people in this town, as opposed to getting down and dirty in the grassroots like, you know, Willie Harrington did. It's very hard for him. Yeah. It's always been to escape that comparison to Harrington. Now
there is steel in the Horton family. AC has good deal himself in that gentle way. His wife, Ruby Horton, is made of steel, and she is unwilling to. She'll back him up. She's unwilling to see him confront things without a lot of resources she brings to the table. And she is, if we are ready for a segue, she is very much involved in another saga going on now, the saga of Henry Brooks of the County Commission. We're ready to go there. Okay? Yeah.
Let's go.
This is the song without an end. What's going on right now? Everybody knows the situation. Henry Brooks started the campaign year. She's term limited for the commission, but she started the campaign year as a pretty good bet to win the juvenile court clerk's race, because she had almost single-handedly forced the Department of Justice to mandate reforms in juvenile court. People appreciated that. Really, all she had to do to ensure a good chance at election was to start making nice to people, which runs a bit counter to her personality, but she's capable of it. And we know what happened. In short order, she insulted an Hispanic gentleman, insulted a couple of colleagues at the same meeting. Then she had a slapping match with a woman in a parking lot that the witnesses blame her for. Finally, she turned up not to be living in her district. And she's come up with a soap opera saga to explain that, and she hasn't really satisfactorily explained it. But I think she's got to be able to run out the clock until the end of her term. And that's beyond all the confrontations and lawyers and so forth who are now involved in that process. I think that's what's going to happen. And
that she'll remain in her seat.
She'll remain in her seat.
Yeah.
And her votes may be conditional, almost like provisional ballots, you know. But they will probably count as long as she's still a legal member of that body and she hasn't been legally pronounced out.
Yeah, and I should say at this point, from the holiday schedule, we're taping on a Tuesday, and this is really in the local courts right now. You had the first judge recuse himself. I mean, there may be a series of judges who recuse themselves before they find somebody who can take a look at this case. And the case, you know, on some level, Les, this is one of those things where you read it and you think, isn't this straightforward? You either live in your district or you don't. But there, I suppose, are more complications to the question.
There are more complications to the question, and derives from the way that it was done by the county commission. The state requires that there must be a process laid out to expel a member of the county commission. That is not specifically laid out in the charter of the commission. So there must be due process, and that's the argument her attorneys, Andre Wharton and Michael Working, are basing the whole case on. That due process was not given. A whole thing was not aired. It was only on with the advice of the county attorney, Marcy Ingram, that they acted upon that.
I think R.J. Wharton likened it to, you've had the prosecutor give its presentation, you skip the whole defense part, and you go to the base, you go to the ruling.
But that's what the charter seems to allow.
Yeah, it seems to allow that, but then again, I mean, due process is due process. We were told, okay, well, this is, in the report made by Marcy Ingram, we went to the houses, we talked to one person here who said this, one person here, and she doesn't live there.
Well, you
can't really base a whole case on that.
Here's a defense that Henry Brooks and her lawyers put forth. It sounds like a discarded scenario from As the World Turns or something.
Oh, yeah.
But the idea was she had a gentleman friend that she shared that Midtown residence with. Their romance or whatever it was broke up. She moved out. Everything was always in his name. But her heart still lingered there. She always had an intent someday to return. In the meantime, yes, she had a daughter living in Cordova. She went to visit her daughter, and that's all that was, staying in touch with the family. Right. And then there came this mysterious woman in South Memphis that also was in the district that she supposedly had the residence with.
Maureen
but this
Jones.
is where people go, does she live in the district or not?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just, and so maybe the due process thing, I mean, that makes, I think most people would begrudgingly say, yeah, there needs to be a fair hearing. But you live there or you don't.
But she's running the clock out with that.
Right.
Now, there are political implications to this because the county still has to pass a tax rate. Yeah. Heidi Schaefer is one of those who has a tax rate that takes the 4 extra cents off the people living in the county and equalizes the tax rate everywhere. There's another tax rate proposal that requires that the 4 cents remain out there. She figures that if she can keep things as they are, her side wins. And that's involved here.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, and then also, Henry Brooks is running for juvenile court clerk.
She's
on the ballot.
She's on the ballot
against Joy Tuliadis, who has not said a word.
She has been very low
about this.
This has an election strategy where you let your
she's low profile anyhow, but now it works for her.
It's the way that Republicans do it here.
Yeah.
They play the Rose Garden strategy. They let the Democrats go out and make fools of themselves or whatever, and then they are the beneficiaries of it. And then on election day, they come out in the numbers, and then they push through and they win.
And to tie those two things together that we've talked about, the aforesaid Ruby Horton is Henry's campaign manager.
Yeah.
And she's sticking by her.
Yeah. Well, we segue into elections, and I think I said fall elections at the top of the show, but in my classic way, there's so many elections here. It is my pet peeve of Memphis and Shelby County. There are actually big elections in August, and then there are fall elections, but we'll call, for purposes of the show, August is the fall. Well, let's walk through some of the big, we'll start with you, Jackson. I've got the ballot here. It's, 8-9 pages. It's a huge number of races. Some are primaries, some are final elections. Let's highlight some.
Well, let's start with the judicial races because we have 81 people running for judge here in Shelby County. I don't know the exact number of judges, but a lot of those, a lot of incumbents, a lot of challengers, quite a few open seats. And that process has become very complicated. There was a time in human history when the Memphis Bar Association's lawyers poll was the key to voters as to who to vote for. And they still issue that. They issued it this week, and it has specific percentages that indicate very strongly who the lawyers prefer for these positions. In the meantime, everybody else has gotten the act. The two political parties have been endorsing, and the process has been very uneven and very disorderly, particularly on the Democratic side, I should say. And that's why the Democrats keep revisiting their endorsements, because they've made what many of them think to be a few errors. Basically, they had the criterion, are you a Democrat or not? Have you voted in more Democratic primaries than Republican ones? Then fine, endorsed. So a lot of judges who cannot meet that requirement with considerable pedigrees have been discarded. And there is the Ben Jones chapter of the National Bar Association, that's the Black Bar Association. Last year they announced a plan to put a member in every race. They didn't quite succeed in that, and they maintain they're not making endorsements. But still, the incumbent judges who have opponents they didn't anticipate blamed Ben Jones for doing this. I don't know what the situation is. I do know that there are a lot of political undercurrents that are making a lot of people nervous. We don't know who we're going to end up with and why.
Yeah, I got two quickly. You've got, of course, the Shelby County mayor's race. Deidre Malone, Democrats, Mark Luttrell, Republican, the incumbent. Sailing along from everything I can understand. And here's the thing about Ms. Malone and her candidacy. Have we seen her on any of the front pages in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks? No, because she's been pushed off by Henry Brooks, by the city hall business that's going on. She needs that publicity. She needs to be out there, other than these forums, candidate forums, which they're all going to, but still in all, they're not getting any press. And therefore, and now you've got Luttrell going in deep into his war chest, doesn't have to go too deep because he's got a lot, and now he's hitting the airways with spots. We still have yet to see that from Deidre Malone.
Now, Joe Brown, who back in the day was going to be the boss, the fountainhead of the Democratic resurgence, he's now emerging again after a month of.
This is the district attorney race.
Yes, but he's been given a responsibility by other Democrats for upholding the whole ticket. He's now emerging. We'll see how that works. He can't. I don't think he can match Luttrell dollar for dollar, despite the fact that he has a fortune of some sort.
Yeah, Amy Wyrick.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, Luttrell is the one who's the fountainhead for the Republicans.
Exactly. $212,000 we reported on our station that Amy Wyrick has in her war chest in terms of advertising, and she's going to use it. You know.
And the wide support, you go back to the judicial poll, I think you referenced wide support among them, big support among the lawyer community and I think the law enforcement community. Joe Brown carries that name cachet, and there's sort of a, I don't know, in the media we might call it entertainment value, that he's involved. But he hasn't been very active. He's been silent for the last month or so.
For at least a month,
since he made kind of a splash and then got in some sort of legal tangle.
Maybe he's got to peak at the right time.
Yeah.
Well, maybe so.
Maybe, and let's move on as well to, I'm just picking some, again, it's a big ballot. Lee Harris versus Ophelia Ford. Ford, one of the last of not the last, but one of the last of the older generation of the Ford dynasty, which is not such the dynasty anymore. Lee Harris, an up-and-coming, recent city councilman. Ophelia took a tremendous amount of flack for not attending a lot of the legislative session.
For various
she does not have a particularly great reputation up there. I mean, you spend a whole lot of time up there too, Jackson. I spend a lot of time up there when the legislature's in session. She's not, she is viewed. She's not viewed kindly.
She has been anybody's ballot for the least effective member up there, quite frankly. But a complication in this race, Lee Harris is running a very aggressive and probably a very smart race. A complication is there's a third candidate in that race, Ricky Dixon, the brother of Roscoe Dixon, who was a Tennessee Walsh figure also in the state Senate. He's gotten considerable votes in the past when he's run. He was going to drain some votes away from Lee Harris. And there is always a Ford factor when there's a Ford running. Ophelia could come through again because of that. Otherwise, if she was in a one-on-one, I think she'd be sunk clearly.
And then let's go to Lamar Alexander against Joe Carr. This probably, the Tea Party has said for a long time they wanted to go after Lamar Alexander, but not being a true conservative, not being a deep conservative. Some of that was kind of written off. Alexander has this huge war chest. He's just impenetrable. But then Mississippi happens, and Virginia happens, and a Tea Party candidate knocks Eric Cantor out, the Republican majority leader, and Thad Cochran in Mississippi almost loses.
Well, they almost
so now Joe Carr's campaign, the Tea Party campaign in Tennessee, is they couldn't be more fired up.
Well,
they have a chance.
Lamar Alexander's no Thad Cochran.
He's a friend of yours, and he's not Thad Cochran, right?
Lamar is he might be getting up there in age, but this is an active guy who's out there front and center and all that. Thad Cochran was, pushed out there, and he made it through, incidentally, with a lot of African American votes, Democratic votes, and he got through.
Your take on the Alexander Carr race?
Oh, I think that Joe Carr started without the kind of support that McDaniels in Mississippi had, and he's playing catch up. There's not enough time. Lamar started 2 years ago raising a huge bankroll, and he got everybody signed up to support him. That's a lot of ground to cover. Now, George Flynn is the third candidate in that race who runs for things, and George is now kind of keyed up thinking, hey, this is real.
That he could split some votes.
But he was take votes away from Carr.
Yeah. Well, let's segue from there into the death of Howard Baker. He passed away this last week. And he was a senator, the old moderate wing of the Republican Party,
when
the
that
first
used to exist.
popularly elected Republican senator. Your thoughts on Howard Baker?
He was a key figure, and healing the nation's wounds during that Watergate period because he did have that reputation as a moderate. Now, in fact, a line that he made famous and which really governed the way people thought about Watergate, what did the president know and when did he know it? That is taken to mean, most people have applied that to him thinking he was one of the pursuers of Richard Nixon. It really wasn't his purpose. That was a line thinking he could isolate the president from things.
Yeah.
But still, he gave a bipartisan cover for the investigation and the eventual resolution.
Well, and a couple of quotes from some articles that came out. He called the Watergate the greatest disillusionment of his political career. Quote, I believed it was a political ploy, Watergate, of the Democrats that would come to nothing. But a few weeks into that, it began to dawn on me that there was more to it than I thought and more to it than I liked. It was his great disillusionment.
Well, you know, I talked with John Ryder, who worked on the last Senate campaign that Baker did. And he said that every day he'd have conversations with him, and Baker talked about that politician didn't have to be a dirty word. He felt that a politician was a citizen who got into politics for the good of everyone. And that's what he did. I mean, he had this Southern genteel kind of attitude towards what it was, but he had a solid basis and backbone for the Constitution. He believed in the Constitution more than anything else.
But when we talk about
when
we talk about the Tea Party and the mainstream Republicans and the fight with Lamar Alexander, I think people think Alexander was going to win, but it does mark this shift. Louis Donaldson, who was Baker's partner at Baker Donaldson, said back in November 2012, today Howard Baker couldn't get nominated. That's how much difference there is in the Republican Party. It's a pretty remarkable thing. We leave it there. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.